Welcome to Codex History of Video Games. I'm Mike Coletta.
I'm Tyler Osby.
And today we have a very special guest. We're talking about their book, Star Trek Games. We have Mat Bradley-Tschirgi. Thank you for joining us, Matt.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about your book because we're both Star Trek fans here, and it's going to be a fun day, and I'm really stoked about it. So we got a lot of questions here written down. Tyler, do you want to start?
Yeah. So obviously you are a Star Trek fan, but when did you decide to write a book specifically about Star Trek video games?
Right. Yeah. So I wanted to do a book about video games for a while, and some of my other books and podcast stuff has sort of touched on it. Like my first book was on the films of Uwe Boll, the video game movies. And to try and pick a topic for a video game book was challenging. And actually, it wasn't Star Trek originally. I had pitched a Star Wars book to this publisher, and that wasn't going to be what they wanted. But I said, "Oh, how about Star Trek?" And they wanted that. So, But I mean, Star Trek was something I always liked. I think the first Star Trek thing I saw was I was like 8 years old, and we rented the videotape of Star Trek 4: The Voyage Home.
So is that the one with the whales?
That's one with the whales, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a strange one to start with because it's a literally a fish out of water story. But these characters who you don't really know, they're like out of their element, and so it's like, well, wait, what? How are they normally acting? What are they doing? But no, I mean, that's how I got into it, and then I guess it was more. I think the first in the theater I saw was Star Trek Generations. I kind of saw stuff through the movies, but growing up, I only actually had just one Star Trek game, so a lot of this book was new to me as far as the research goes. And that game was the Star Trek 25th anniversary one on the PC. I had it in a collection called, I think it was Interplay, the first decade or something like that. And it had 10 games, including Battle Chess and, all these other Interplay things.
We were just talking about Battle Chess like a couple weeks
Were you?
ago,
Okay.
actually. Yeah, because we covered the early Lego games, and then I was talking about like a good chess game for PC, and Battle Chess was the one that I brought up because that was like my childhood chess game.
No, Battle Chess was a good one. They made some more recent version. I don't know if it's called Battle Chess, but they did with full motion video where they had people dressed up like knights and stuff. And they're not chopping each other's heads off. Like the violence is sort of muted, but that was kind of wild to see. If you look online, you can find clips of it.
So like a modern FMV game. That's kind of just weird to hear about in general. I feel like. Cool. Well, okay. So I have a question about your book. One thing I loved about your book is you actually have a glossary up front. And I feel like that's kind of something you don't see that much. Was that always a choice for you to include, or were you kind of writing the book realizing there's a lot of terms in here? Like how did
right. Yeah. It was sort of a last minute decision on my end. I'm part of some groups online where kind of group chats going. And one of them is people that, write about games or game designers and that kind of thing. And I kind of floated it past them, and they kind of agreed with me that it needed a glossary. Not that they read the book in advance, but it covers so much of gaming history that I'm like, well, wait a second. There's people reading this that they might not, they might be Star Trek fans, but maybe not video game fans, or maybe they're more fans of current games. So because of that, I did the glossary, and I thought, oh, this will be one page. And then it ended up, a good bit longer than that. But I'm happy I put it in there. I think hopefully it gives context and makes things make a little more sense, because there used to be like sound cards and floppy disk and CD-ROM drives, and none of those things really exist anymore. Not in the same way anyway.
Yeah, that was one thing.
The Star Trek games cover such a wide span of time that you get lots of different technology in there.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. Like the history that Star Trek went through is like most of video game history, from like text games all the way up to now. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what made it, back to your first question, appealing as a topic, is that there's so many Star Trek games. Narrowing it down to some was tricky, but it's like there's going to be enough where there'll be something to, I think, appeal to everyone in a way, whether you like one Star Trek show or another, and they're over many decades, but they're also over many genres as well, right? They're not all flight simulators or action games or puzzle games. It's kind of a mixture of everything.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So you broke the book up like by movies and TV shows. Was that kind of always the plan of how you were going to organize it, or did you think about doing it like more chronologically, or?
Yeah. I mean, initially it was going to be chronologically, and as I was just looking over the table of contents, in case anyone was wondering, I write most of my books with a program called Scrivener, which you can then export to Word. I don't know if anyone's used that, but you can basically rearrange chapters and things kind of in a nonlinear fashion and have your notes in there and choose what gets exported. But might be a bit more detailed than you wanted to know. But point being, yeah, I mean, it was originally chronologically. And I'm like, wait, this is going to be a very disjointed experience for the reader, because they might say, okay, original series, then Next Generation, then DS9, then Next Generation games again. And I talked about it with a friend of mine, Mike, out here, and then I was looking for him for feedback, and he seemed to think like people would like it better if it was divided up by the shows and the movies, because everyone seems to have a favorite Star Trek show, and so that's kind of the direction I was going in.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Because when I first started reading the book, I like skipped to Next Generation. That's my favorite. I was like, oh, I see what these next gen games are, and then I went back and read everything else.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely jumped around too. All right, so if you had to choose, this is a hard question.
Mhm.
If you had to pick one game, if someone's like, I've never played a Star Trek game, what Star Trek game do you recommend? Do you have one from this book that you think you could recommend to them? I know that's a hard question. It's narrowing things down.
It's a hard question, I think, on a few levels. Like, I don't know what Star Trek series they like, but let's pretend that doesn't matter. And also, let's pretend they have some experience with computer games, because if there's not much of a gamer, some of these might be a bit more confusing or harder to get into. And I would say the one I think that's a good one to get into is just the Star Trek 25th anniversary on the PC. It's a graphic adventure game, so you're solving puzzles. There's a chance you can die, but you can always restore a game if you remember to save it in the first place. There's also a bit of flight sim in there, although you control it with the mouse, I think, or you can do a joystick maybe. And those sequences are, challenging, but not impossible. And you get the voice acting of the original Star Trek crew, which I think makes it immersive, and it's easy to find. And that's another thing that inspired me to do this book is there's not that many Star Trek games you can purchase out there legitimately that are older. If you look on GOG or Steam, they have maybe a dozen or so, but it's not like Star Wars, where most of the catalog is readily available. So I'm hoping in some way this book can inspire more of the older games to be released legitimately, because I think even if not all these games are good, I think they all have value, and people, even a bad game is someone's favorite.
Definitely.
Yeah, a lot of the games are PC. It seems like the vast majority of them are PC games. Do you think there's something about Star Trek that lends itself to the PC platform, or do you think it's just like coincidence, or what do you make of that?
It's a good question. I think Star Trek is something where it's been around for so long. It started the same time as the Adam West Batman show, so since 1966. And you had people into it that were older, and also when they did repeats, people that were younger. And so they started making knockoff Star Trek games on the college campuses. And so that's where computer gaming or gaming started with Star Trek on a computer. It was always on a computer, and it kind of always stayed there. And the show is about technology, and not everyone that watches Star Trek is a computer nerd or likes computer games, but it certainly increases the chances.
It's probably a larger portion than maybe
yes,
another show.
I would think so.
Bunch of nerds watching Star Trek, bunch of nerds like
Maybe.
computers.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
That's a perfect combination. Yeah.
I also kind of noticed that it seems like as it was going through this, like most of these games are like not great games. Like some of them are okay, and there are some that are pretty good, right? But it seemed like most of them were like, you can kind of skip this. What portion of that, like, if you had to put it like a hit percentage on this, what do you think? Is it like more than half are good, or?
I would say less than half are good, probably. I think when I was choosing stuff for the book, I tried to do a broad variety of times and genres, and also what shows or what things they covered. I mean, there's also chapters I took out of the book because it was sort of getting more than what the word count was supposed to be. But there's certainly enough Star Trek games out there for a volume 2 if there's interest. And I've already had people. I gave some advanced copies to people, and I've had feedback like, well, why didn't you pick this game, or why didn't you pick this game? And like, I knew that was going to happen, right? Because there's so many games out there. And I think people always like to compare Star Trek and Star Wars. And I think the Star Trek video games on the whole are worse, but they're probably more interesting in that Star Wars, you have a guy running around with the lightsaber, or you're in an X-Wing flying around. Like, that's pretty hard to mess up. But Star Trek can be a lot of different things, and the TV shows usually people dealing with complicated situations. And how do you make that into a video game? Like, that's a really difficult assignment.
Yeah.
And you also had a lot of different developers doing these games. It's not like the LucasArts, where a lot of the Star Wars games were done in-house, and kind of smaller teams that had worked on these kind of things before. So and there's also Star Trek games that never came out. I mean, I don't get into this in the book exactly, but doing research, I found there was a Star Trek First Contact game that never came out that was in development. And you think that would make a lot of sense for a video game, right? Star Trek and the Borg and the movie with the explosions. Instead, we get garbage like what's the one I'm looking at? Wait, just scrolling through here. Star Trek Hidden Evil, which is a follow-up to the movie Star Trek Insurrection, I believe, the one before Nemesis. And it's this very kind of like third-person action adventure broken up into levels, and you have to just super simple gameplay that's a follow-up to a movie a lot of people think is one of the worst Star Trek movies. So
that actually kind of was going to flow right into my next question. We asked you what the best one was, so we have to ask you what you, in your opinion, think the worst one is. And it sounds like there's a lot to choose from as far as
there's a lot to choose from. It depends on what day it is. Sometimes my opinion changes, but I think one that's pretty poor is the Star Trek DS9 Dominion Wars. So it's a real-time strategy game. That one, it was the hardest to get running on my computer, so I don't like it for that reason. But the other reason is real-time strategy. But if you've ever played like Command and Conquer or StarCraft, part of the appeal, at least to me, for those games is you're building your base, then building units. In this one, there's no building a base. You just have your units, and you have your units fight the other units, and that's it, which is really boring.
Yeah.
And it's also this like 3D camera thing, and then the interface isn't like, if they would have done something like Command and Conquer where it had like full motion video cutscenes or something, but it just seems cheap. Like they just have screens of text. You pick your missions from like a list on a menu. Like it felt really rushed, and that's too bad for a show like Star Trek DS9 and that Dominion Wars kind of setting towards the later half of the series could have made a pretty cool game, but that one, it just felt like just such wasted potential.
That's a bummer then. Yeah.
Yep.
Especially if it's like you think this is a really good story and we're just going to throw it away in a video game we rush through. Yeah.
Right.
That's a bummer.
Yeah. Do you have like, what do you think is the gameplay genre or genres that like fits Star Trek the best? Like that.
I think like the adventure game genre is good, like a Space Quest sort of thing. Like with 25th Anniversary did that. The more recent Star Trek Resurgence did that, because you can do puzzles, branching paths with the dialogue. You can kind of make the player think a bit about how they can shape the story, which is something Star Trek it usually is kind of an interactive show in a way, in that you're watching it. The crew goes down to a planet and there's a problem they're trying to solve, and you hear a few different sides of an argument. You go, maybe these people have a point, maybe these people have a point. And in an adventure game, you get to interact with that a bit. So I think that one feels the most like Star Trek. I mean, a genre I wish they would do for a Star Trek game is a dating sim. I think something like that could do really well, because you think of the really early fan fiction as like Kirk and Spock, but there's so many characters and so much shipping going on. I think if they did some cool kind of dating sim, I don't know if they ever will, but I think that could be something that could do well.
You know what they could do? Okay. Do you remember the Next Gen episode where there's like it's kind of early in one of the early seasons? It might be season 1, where there's like a virus on the ship that makes them all start sleeping with each other, but then they
that
don't
is the first season. Yes,
it is the first season, right?
Yep.
It could be in the context of that, and then everyone's dating. It would be perfect.
Yeah. And then at the end, you can say, we solved the virus problem, and everything goes back to normal. So yeah,
then they just like
worried.
Riker just winks at you and then roll credits.
That's funny. Of course, Riker has to wink.
Yeah.
This would be Riker without a beard too.
Oh wow. Yeah, it would be beardless Riker. That's right. So I'm actually going to jump a little ahead here, because I selfishly really want to talk about this game, because it was my like big foray into Star Trek games, because I was a first person shooter kid, and I distinctly remember loving Star Trek Elite Force, and I was super excited that you covered it in the book, because I feel like you don't really think first-person shooter with Star Trek at all, but they pull it off. So I was going to ask, like, what made Elite Force great compared, because you mentioned Klingon Honor Guard being not great, or like kind of monotonous.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think made like Elite Force work for Star Trek?
Part of what made Elite Force work is that you were a member of an elite force, is kind of like these commandos, right? Kind of like a space SWAT team, if you were. Mm-hmm. And that made it feel a bit different from the regular Star Trek thing. And also in Voyager, you have the Borg, which are pretty good, good bad guys for that sort of a thing. And it just, the way it built with the characters, I think the interaction with it worked pretty well, as opposed to the one you said, Klingon Honor Guard. It wasn't that related to the TV show. It seemed pretty far removed, and it, you know, a lot of the time you're just killing other Klingons on these sort of nondescript, rocky planets that just go on and on and on and on. And there didn't seem much of a driving force, but with the Elite Force, you know, I think it had more momentum to the story. And I also liked in Elite Force, there's a mode if you want. I think they included it on in the expansion, where you can just explore the ship and kind of collect things, and it's kind of more chill, and that's nice, because I think that's a fantasy always of these shows, is you like, oh, I'd like to see the bridge, I'd like to see what it's like to, you know, get lunch from the replicator, you know, something like that.
Yeah, for sure. I actually, when I played the game, I think it was on PlayStation 2 is how I played it, if I'm remembering correctly. Like, it was on console I played it. Yeah. And it didn't have that mode you were talking about. So then I was just like frantically like, I got to try to find this game now and see if they have a version. I haven't checked Good Old Games yet. I'm hoping that one's on there.
They do. Yep.
They do, because that one's like one that I feel like would be a perfect fit for Good Old Games. One of my favorite things about Elite Force, and this is just me like on a tangent real quick because I love it. Tyler, can you push the button? Thank you. Okay. We love having a soundboard here. The Borg fights, if I'm remembering this correctly, you have to switch weapons when you're fighting them, because they start to remember the shots. And I thought that was so cool that they did that in a video game. Like, just a little subtle detail like that, where you can't use the same gun over. Like in a first-person shooter, you find the gun you like and you use it over and over again. You can't do that when you fight the Borg. I thought that was really a neat inclusion.
Yeah, in some of the levels, you can also sneak around the Borg a bit if you want to, or start to shut off, you know, power grids, and give you kind of different options to get through the levels where you're not always shooting at things. And that felt nice too, to have that variety.
Yeah, and also you could be a male or female protagonist, which was kind of a cool feature in the game at that time.
Yeah, I think another thing the expansion had with it was the original release of the game didn't have Jerry Ryan as 7 of 9, and they patched that in with the expansion for whatever reason. So
that's awesome. I'm happy. That makes me really happy. Also, Jerry Ryan, good reference, because she just got into a Twitter battle recently. So this is a topical episode.
Did she?
Oh yeah, with Tesla. It was pretty exciting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
there was that drama.
There was Twitter drama, and it was pretty great watching 7 of 9 go after somebody on Twitter. I loved it.
I bet.
Cool. We just missed 7 of 9, Dave, a few days ago, July 9th.
Yeah. Oh. That's right.
Yeah. Were there any particular guests that you got for the book that were like the dream guest? Like, because you have interviews as you go throughout the book, and you get to talk to people who are in either developers who worked on the game, or just other folks who have thoughts on these games. So was there a favorite, or did you tell me more?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say favorite, but I think some of the ones that stuck out to me were, one was, let me just get to the right page here. So I have, there we go. Nope, not that one. Oh, come on. Yeah. So one was like with Scott Miller, and he did a knockoff Star Trek game called Trek Trivia, but it was the first game he made for his company, Apogee. And, you know, I didn't really have a computer in the house, or at least we didn't have one we could play games on until he was like 12 or something. But some of the first games I played were the Apogee and 3D Realms, like Duke Nukem and Commander Keen and all these things. So to talk to the guy that was a founder of a company who was some of the first computer games I ever played, I think was pretty cool. And just to ask him about this old game he did that I'm sure he hasn't been interviewed about much, if at all, was a neat opportunity. Because when you get people for interviews, well, you know, doing this podcast, like, it just takes a lot of time and more time than people might think. And then even if you book someone, it's not always a sure thing, or sometimes stuff pops up. So I'm glad I worked to get those interviews in the book, because I think if it was just a book about my write-ups on the games and the pictures, and that would have been great. But I think the interviews at least add something to it, where you can see a bit about how the sausage is made, or even some of them, the people I interview are like critics, right, or what they thought of the games. And I think that makes it a bit more well-rounded.
Yeah. One thing I liked about that interview is how you mentioned like what it takes to find a hard or easy trivia question. Like he broke that down really well, which I thought was really, really. He's like, if I know it, it's easy. So
right.
I love that answer.
Yeah, it's been a while, but about 10 years ago, I used to host bar trivia for a year for Geeks Who Drink out here in Portland, Oregon. And like that was really difficult you have to read questions, you have to do the math, you have to use an Excel spreadsheet to do all the scores. You had to take photos for social media. It's one of those, like, there's a lot to that kind of work where you think, oh, going to bar trivia, it's fun to go to, but after you host it for a year, it's not as fun for me to go to anymore.
Because you know the work that
because I know the work it takes.
You know what's I found out, because I do stand-up comedy, and a lot of comedians on their off nights do bar trivia hosting because it's a good way to make money.
Sure.
And I found out because a friend of mine just started doing it, and she told me it's all on your phone now, so you don't have to manually add up scores.
That'd be easier.
You were in the trenches 10 years ago is what it was really hard. You were did the nitty gritty. Now it's like easy. It's on phones. It's like whatever.
Right. Yeah, we had paper for people to fill out the answer to the questions, and there was a lot more things to look around. I bet with a phone it would be a lot easier.
Yeah. Also, I mean, a phone's hard though, because you got cheating always. I remember being and doing bar trivia and like everyone accusing each other of cheating all the time because someone was checking a text message. This was in Los Angeles.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think you can really stop people from cheating. I think if they want to, they'll find a way to do it.
For sure. Tyler, do you want to hit the post tangent button? It's the same one we did before.
This is the closing tangent button?
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, good. It never gets old. All right. So I actually have a question here, because one of the games that I was reading about that I was kind of intrigued by was Star Trek Deep Space Nine: The Fallen, because it's a third-person shooter. And you described this as being like one of the best games you played in the book.
Yep.
And so what made it like, because third-person shooter, I don't think of for Star Trek. How come this game is so good?
There's a few things. One is like it has a main storyline that you can play through 3 different ways. So from the point of view of different characters, you can play it as either, who was it? Do I have the list here?
Yeah, I remember that you're saying there's 3 characters.
Yeah, you can play it as like, I think it's Cisco, Worf, and one of the other, Cisco, Kira, and Worf. That's right. And you have to sort of play through each campaign to get the complete idea of what the story is, which is a bit disjointed, but I like that idea. It makes you kind of work for it. It's more story based, but there's also action and puzzles. And I think seeing the third person point of view, you get to kind of admire the ships and the buildings and the architecture a bit more. It does have aim assist, which I think helps as well. And it's just the lighting I thought was good too, with whatever engine they used. It might have been the Quake 3 engine or something like that. The lighting looked a bit better than some of the other games.
Nice. Yeah, I was intrigued. I was like, I got to see. Is that one? Do you know if that one's on Good Old Games or not?
That one's not. It should be, but that's one that is routinely in these like top 10 list of best Star Trek games.
As always, we talk about how you need to always legally own a legal copy of your video game when you play, obviously. But did you use PCM to try to play some of these games? Because I had to do that for some episodes where I had to like emulate a PC to make them work. Did you have to do that at all?
You had to use emulation to get these things to work, sure. Yeah. And it's I got them working under Windows 11, which can be pretty challenging. And there's different sources out there, but it still takes a lot of time. And like if money and time are no objects, I would love to have a computer lab with 6 different computers of different vintages, but that's not going to happen, unfortunately. So that was a real challenge, almost more so than the writing itself sometimes, was getting the games to work. But once they were working, and that was like a big stepping stone, I think. Because at first I had sold the idea of the book, and then I'm like, wait, can I get these games to work? How does that? Because I've done some of this stuff before, but to do it at this level with this many titles, there was some very specific things that had to be done.
Yeah, imagine.
Yeah, I remember Mike had some trouble getting a lot of those older Lego games to work.
Oh yeah, I had a lot of a lot of them. I had to just turn the sound off because the sound was the problem. I could play the game, but the sound was just making the world's worst grating noises in my ear, and I was just like, well, I can't talk about the music, so we'll just go through with the game.
Sure, yeah, sound can be a problem, but then it's good to point out, even at the time these games came out, especially I found like the Windows 95, 98 kind of era, these games were hard to run back in the day too. Like you had so many different graphics cards. Sound cards usually weren't that much of a problem by then, but the systems were just so different. I mean, that's one thing that makes console games easier to how do I put this? To play no matter what system you have, right? Because it's just you're putting games into one system, but computers can have any infinite number of hardware in them, and trying to emulate that can be kind of a nightmare.
Definitely. Yeah, and these days every console, I mean, if it's a few years old, has an emulator, and that's modern software, so it runs on a modern machine.
That's right.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about the research that goes into this, because as a history podcast, we're always interested in like how people go about researching these games. So you played a lot of them in emulation. You said you got a lot running on your machine. Can you tell us more about just the process of learning about these games?
Right. I mean, I think it all begins with doing a table of contents and trying to figure out which games I'm going to cover. And it's also what games you can get working to play is another part of that. But yeah, I mean, so just narrowing it down, I think, was really challenging. And just because, I mean, you can start with something with Wikipedia, which is okay. But then if you sort of dig down, it's like, okay, you have these licensed games where back in the day, Star Trek 25th anniversary, there's the computer game, there's the Nintendo game, there's the Game Boy game, there's the, whatever other platform it was on. And they're all different games. So which one of those am I going to cover? If not, and it was really tricky making some of those decisions. I did a lot of looking up, I forget the website exactly, but they have an archive of most of the issues of Computer Gaming World on there as PDFs. Wow. And that was really helpful to see what the reviews were of those games at the time, and also to see what like the advertising was. So
that's really cool.
Yeah, if you just look up Computer Gaming World Archive, you can find it. But it's not every issue, but it's pretty close to it. And you want to see how different computer games are, or even the coverage of computer games. It's just really just bananas to see how it's changed over time. Or even you'd have these big like preview events, and how they describe the games in the previews are different than the games that actually come out. So
yeah.
I love that we love going through like old magazines and instruction manuals. That's like one of my favorite things to research on the podcast, because it's just so silly to look back and just see how it was done.
Computer Gaming World is really interesting too, because of the discs that it came with.
Oh yes, sure. The disc, and I think on archive.org you can find the discs for Computer Gaming World or PC Gamer and stuff. And sometimes it has their own menus with Easter eggs and little videos and stuff. There also, let's think, what else with the research. Sometimes on YouTube I could find like old behind the scenes videos of these things, and there wasn't much of them, but there was some, and that could be useful sometimes. I really liked in here, I interviewed, I think it's in the Klingon Academy chapter, I talked to Bart Farkas, who wrote a few Star Trek hint guides back in the day. And to contact a strategy guide author might seem a bit strange. One of the ones I tried to contact said that happened a long time ago and wouldn't get back to me. But Bart Farkas was really cool about it, and it was he I think I mentioned this in the interview in the book, but they actually flew him down to the set for Star Trek Academy and Klingon Academy, where they had full motion video, and he got to meet William Shatner and stuff like that. So
that's really cool.
Just as the strategy guide writer, they're like,
just that, right? It's not like it was the strategy guide writer, right? It wasn't like you might expect that from a journalist from PC Gamer or Computer Gaming World, but for the strategy guide writer, they put him on a plane and in a hotel and go to the set and talk to the actors and stuff. That's I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. We've talked about it at length, but I have huge nostalgia for strategy guides, just like in general. Yes. It's just such a bygone era, I would say. So I don't have this on our list. I'm kind of adding to our list here, but I noticed a lot of these games are real-time strategy. Do you
Yes.
think this just like it's just because of the nature of Star Trek and you're like commanding these ships? It's like just that's just the most obvious thing. And is there one that stands out to you that did a real-time strategy really well?
I think you have a point there in that, yeah, certainly there's a lot of ships and vehicles and toys really for Star Trek, and that you can have that as a real-time strategy game makes sense. And yeah, I'd say, Star Trek Armada 2 was a pretty good one. Both Star Trek Armada games are on Good Old Games, so that's pretty cool, and they get the voices from the show and everything, and that one is kind of like more what you would expect for a game. How am I looking here?
Like
There
they
it
actually let you build bases, which is
they let you build bases. It plays more like a StarCraft or something, and you can kind of pick what campaign you want to play as. I think in Armada 2, the single player campaign is kind of like a separate story, but there's an overarching story. But in Armada 1, it's more of like a story that goes through the different races that's kind of more cohesive. But yeah, I mean, it's cool what it does. And what I thought was really neat is when you're attacking a ship, it has a picture-in-picture that shows different camera angles of lasers attacking the ships.
That's really cool.
So, and while you can zoom in a little bit, like you can't get that close. So to get that kind of camera angle where it vaguely looks like you're watching something from the TV show is pretty neat.
It sounds great.
That larger strategy genre seems pretty well suited to something like Star Trek, where when there is action in Star Trek, they're usually making like broader strategic decisions and not so much like small tactical decisions. It seems like if they're choosing to fire on a ship or something like that. That's at least my take on the show. I have a friend who used to always say Star Wars is better than Star Trek because Star Trek is all about avoiding giant space battles. I was like, oh, that's why I like it more.
I think I like them for different reasons. But yeah, I mean, one of the more novel games I covered, and this one also happens to be on Good Old Games, is Bridge Commander, where you sit in the captain's chair and you're giving command. I mean, you could make that as a mobile game, I think, pretty easily, but because a lot of what you're doing is clicking on different people and making choices from menus, and you do get to control the cockpit a bit with the guns and missiles, but it's mainly assigning jobs to different people, and it almost feels like a simulation game in a way. But I thought was a pretty novel approach to it.
Isn't there a VR version of that too?
That's what I was actually just
that's a separate game, but it's the same sort of idea. Yeah. And I mean, that's one I considered covering for the book, and I just sort of decided not to. But I played not the VR. I mean, I had it on PS4, and you can play it without the VR helmet, and it was pretty fun. I mean, I think the gameplay is sort of limited and it gets pretty chaotic, but I think that's sort of the fun of it. Like you have everyone. I tended to play as the engineer, and I would get shouted at a lot because, oh, you didn't push the right button, or you have very limited ways to do things. And it does feel a bit like a Star Trek episode in the short levels and that missions in that game where you nothing much is happening, and then, oh no, everything's on fire. What's going to happen? You got to try to fix everything at once. Oh, the ship is under attack. So,
like a space team. Is that the game where you have to like yell? You're yelling at each other to fix
a little bit. Yeah, it's a bit like that. Yeah,
yeah, that's a fun game. You talked a little bit about like a dating simulator would be a good genre for Star Trek. Do you have how would you describe your dream Star Trek game? Like if somebody was saying, hey, you're in charge of making a Star Trek game.
No budget, like
no
unlimited budget, like whatever.
Unlimited budget. Okay, yeah. Unlimited budget's different from no budget, but
yeah. Sorry, I said that.
No, that's fine.
I said no budget is in sky's to the moon. Whatever you want.
Sky's the limit. Sure.
Yeah, sky's the limit. Sky's to the moon. I'm messing up left and right. Go ahead.
Yeah, I already said the dating sim idea. If I was to do another one, right, where like money wasn't a problem, it might be fun to do. I don't know how you would do this, but something sort of like Mario Maker meets Star Trek.
Oh.
Something where people could make little scenarios, and I think you could do it maybe side-scrolling with the pixel sort of graphics, and make it not where they're just collecting, gold press latinum or something, but they would still be wandering around. They could solve little puzzles. There'd be little environmental things they could do. but something where people can, do their own kind of scenarios and share them with each other, I think would be sort of fun.
That would be really cool. That's a great answer. So I feel like we didn't put this on our list, and it seems kind of strange we didn't. But do you have a favorite Star Trek show? Like, yeah. How come I don't know why we didn't put this on our list?
No, that's a good question. I don't know. I would say for me, I guess I'd say the original series, like either that one or DS9 are probably my favorite. I haven't seen that much of Star Trek Prodigy, which is one of the newer cartoons.
Mm-hmm.
And then Star Trek Enterprise, my wife and I are just starting to watch, and we're just in the first season of that one. So
that's Scott Bakula, right?
That is the Scott Bakula one. Yes. I don't think that'll be one of my favorites.
It has a great theme.
Well, you know what that theme is from originally? It is that song was the end credits music for the Robin Williams comedy Patch Adams.
Oh, really?
And then they didn't change they might have changed the lyrics a bit for the Star Trek theme, but it was done by Rod Stewart and Patch Adams, and I think it had a slightly different name.
That's one of the best pieces of trivia we've ever had on this podcast.
Deep cut.
Deep. That's really good. That's really good.
So it's one of those where like you could say, what do Robin Williams and Star Trek have in common? I guess you could pull that out.
Yeah, that's great. The theme to Enterprise. What a great little piece of trivia. Okay, so that's all the questions we had, but we do another segment on the podcast before we end for the day where we ask what you've been playing, like what video games you've been playing recently. I'm going to ask Tyler first to give you some time so you're not throwing it on you. But Tyler, what you've been playing this week?
This week, I've been playing a lot of Destiny 2.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of doing stuff in space, I've been shooting a lot of aliens in space in Destiny 2. And I'm very slowly making my way through the remake of Super Mario RPG. I'm really stoked on that game, and I have some time off next week, and I'm going to spend a bunch of it playing Mario RPG, I think. So that's kind of it. What have you been playing, Mike?
I have been playing a lot of Destiny 2, and to the point where it's like I haven't had a lot of time this week to play games, which is kind of upsetting. I was on the road, actually. I was gone for shows, but I really want to start this week. My goal is to start Dishonored because I've never played Dishonored before, and I've always wanted to play it. It's on Xbox Game Pass, and I feel like I just need to give it a go. And I know it's not a very long game either. I think it's only like 10 hours, so I feel like it's something I could play in a couple weeks and really go for it. So that's the goal this week. So next week you'll see if I actually completed my goal. But Matt, what have you been playing?
I'm playing a few different things. One is this kind of indie game called War Hospital. That's on Steam, and it's set during World War I on the Western Front, and you're just trying to pick which people to do surgery on and which people to not bother. It's very depressing.
I've heard about this.
It sounds kind of like Papers, Please in like
a
different way.
It's a bit like Papers, Please. I think Papers, Please has a more satisfying gameplay loop, but this is the same sort of idea. And it just makes you think about war in a different way. And to do it from this perspective, I think was really clever.
Yeah, that's a really interesting game.
The one thing with it that's kind of, I think it does have an open-ended mode, but in kind of the main gameplay mode, it's only divided up into 3 chapters, and each one's pretty long. And I wish it would have done it into smaller chapters because there's you can speed up time. There's a bit of waiting around, and every so often the army gets into a fight, which means you're loaded with a lot of bodies that you have to decide what to do with. And it gets pretty grim given the topic, but I think it's worth checking out. I was looking to see what the price of it is. So it's like, $29.99. It's not that much. So if you want something different, I think definitely check that out. And then I've also been playing a Star Trek game I didn't cover in the book, just because I'll be talking about my Star Trek video games book at the Star Trek to Las Vegas at the Rio on August 1st, coming up here. Cool. So I wanted to be up to date in the latest Star Trek game, and there's this one called Star Trek Infinite that came out. That's a 4X game that's in real time, but you can also pause it. So, you're expanding, and then, it's a bit like Civilization or Masters of Orion, except this one is really complicated. I have not played a game like this in a long time, and I just felt completely lost, even with the tutorial.
Is that on Steam?
I'm about ready to put this on the wish list.
Yeah, that's on Steam.
That sounds great.
It's also, it's the price isn't that bad. It's like a
Oh yeah,
$29.99. So
Is it like kind of like Stellaris? Would it be very
yes,
similar to Stellaris?
it's a bit like Stellaris, and I think I just felt a bit lost because I haven't played a game like this in a while. And it's like you have 12 different resources to build things with. I'm like, oh no, but yeah, if you're really into these games, I think you would maybe like it more than me. I just haven't played something like this in a while. But it's not a game that the tutorial is just not really well done. It kind of says, well, here's how to do a few of these things. Now we're going to throw 20 missions at you. Good luck.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I kind of wish that would have been done a bit better, but it does have a nice scope, and it makes you realize the galaxy is a really big place.
Yeah.
And the Star Trek games don't always do that. So
you just gave me an episode idea, Matt.
Okay.
That's the history of tutorials and like what makes a good tutorial, because that is something that I think is really important in a game, as you just described. Like,
it is.
Yeah, that's great. That's cool. Yeah, I'll check out Star Trek Infinite. I'll add it to my wish list for sure. But yeah, awesome. Well, that's pretty much the episode for the day. So, Matt, do you have anything you want to plug? Like I said, you'd be making at that convention in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I'll be at 2 panels in there on August 1st. One is me talking about the book, and the other I'll be there's a Star Trek podcast, Inglorious Treksperts, and they're doing a stage where they have programming all 4 days of the convention. And on that Thursday, on the August 1st, on that Thursday, I'm going to be talking about the best and worst Star Trek video games with some other Star Trek historians and with someone I interviewed with for the book, Dan Martin, who was the head writer on Star Trek Resurgence.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
So
and then the book, as far as like where you can get the book is...
Right. Yeah. The book is called Star Trek Video Games, The Unofficial Guide to the Final Frontier. You can pre-order it on Amazon. It comes out August 30th, I believe. You can also get it if in the UK, you can get it directly from the publisher if you want, but it hits everywhere else on Amazon on August 30th. So excited for that to come out.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I was looking through the book and I was just like, I want the physical copy. I want to look at the pictures and everything, because it's really cool. It's really neat.
Yeah, so I should mention, it's in hardcover and Kindle, and then there'll be a soft cover version eventually. I don't think that'll be until next year though.
I feel like these books are like meant for hardcover because it's one of those things you put on a coffee table that people come over and they're like, that's really awesome that you have that. And then you guys talk about it together. That's a cool thing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, Matt. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, and also social media. I have your Twitter handle down below. Is Twitter the best place to get a hold of you if people want to reach out? Yeah, I think the Twitter is good. MATWBT. I also have a Substack. That's matwbt.substack.com. About. Sorry, Steam is now talking to me with a trailer because I had it open. On my Substack at matwbt.substack.com, I kind of look at a movie, kind of like independent, the combination of like movies with sequels and kind of independent horror movies, and sometimes I'll interview people for that. So that's been fun to do. And then on the Instagram, it's also matwbt, and I have links to the Substack on there as well. Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's Mat Bradley-Tschirgi. Thank you for being on the podcast. And with that, you can find us, by the way, at codexpodcast.net. That's the best way to see all our links on there. I'm going to keep it short today, though. Tyler, do you want to say goodbye to everybody? I do. Goodbye, everybody.